So Andy, you've been part of Christchurch London. You've been part of the leadership essentially for the last 20 years at least, and we are in our 20th year as Christchurch London. It's our anniversary, which is just incredible. And I'm kind of curious. So looking back over 20 years and what it was like leading Christchurch London 20 years ago, fresh in the city, what would you say has been some of the differences between, I guess, being part of Christchurch London then and being part of Christchurch London now, and maybe even leading in a time like this, in a city like ours? Yeah. Are there any particular reflections that you might have?
That is a really good question. I mean, in some ways, so much has changed in 20 years, and yet at the same time, so much is similar. People move to London with the same kind of longings, the same kind of spiritual thirst. I would say what I detect right now, sounds a bit shallow. I was watching an episode of Frasier last night.
Classic. It's really not. Yeah.
One of my favourite shows. I've probably watched it more often than I want to admit. But there was just a scene where Roz, who's now in her 40s and a producer of Frasier's radio show, was taking her younger cousin out, and her younger cousin just wanted to party, travel, be out every night. And there's this quote where basically Ross says, like, you do that in your 20s, it's great fun, but actually there comes the point where you long for something deeper. And as she said it, I'm like, that's what I detect across our city right now, that actually amongst people across the city, there is a kind of this kind of recognition that what I pour my life into, be it tech, be it entertainment, be it pleasure, there's like a shallowness, and I long for something more. And I see it amongst those who don't have faith, but I also see it amongst those who do have faith, that people don't want to come to this like attractional church, teach me, give me a great Sunday experience, then I'll go back to my life. It's like, no, I want depth in every area of my life. I want depth with God, I want depth in community, I want depth in terms of mission and the kind of direction of my life and the difference I make in the world. And I would say that feels a particular change that I have noticed when I talk with people and what they're really looking for in and through church. That said, at the same time, there's much that's similar. And in some ways, the foundations that we're building the church on are still very much the same. And in its essence, it's following Jesus as best we can. But it's gone, the last 20 years has gone like that. And I kind of expect the next 20 years too as well. Yeah.
Trust you to get a great illustration from the Frasier episode.
Frasier's probably my favourite show. I'm sorry it wasn't John Mark Comer, to be honest. I feel like I should be quoting him for your seal of approval.
There'll be people watching this going, what is Frasier?
Yeah.
A lot has changed in 20 years, Andy.
Yeah, sorry guys.
I
don't watch Frasier.
Sure.
Dave said something actually when he preached recently in Marland, which I thought was interesting, where when he first moved, I guess over 20 years ago, to London, there was this real sense of optimism and opportunity in the city, whereas now it's different. It's heavier. There's a lot less, a lot less sense of I could do anything or achieve anything. I think there's a weight now, a heaviness that people carry around, which I mean I wasn't in London 20 years ago, but I can kind of I sort of see that as well, that. The things that we think will work in terms of bringing us meaning, or what we are told is the good life, or what we should aspire to, they don't actually work. This longing for meaning, purpose, genuine connection with God. And I think there's something potentially in the church, just with where it's at, broadly, where like you can't really be lukewarm. Like that's just not really an option anymore. It's you've either got to you're in or you're not in a way, and I think there's a real opportunity there. There's a real, I think, hunger and just a willingness to give Jesus everything, and that's just really exciting. And I think that's partly maybe our context, and just being in the city we're in. But I think maybe more broadly than that, that's just something that God is doing. There's a kind of a rediscovering of what it actually means to follow Jesus and give everything for him and to him. I think that's happening across the board more broadly than just our church. So that's exciting. And we feel that. I think you feel that. I think that's just And then so our job as leaders is to, if that's what God is doing, we just want to respond and make space for that. And yeah.
I know you're finding that in my land. Some of the people that you have talked about coming along to church and stuff. I think it's one of the reasons I love our model of church, is that, like, I love the stuff we see in Sutton, but I love being part of something bigger than that too, and hearing the amazing stories. I think maybe one of the things it'd be great to do in this new chapter is share more stories so the church can hear what's going on. But even the people who've come to faith recently in my land is just really exciting.
Yeah. And just to highlight a couple of those, without getting into the specifics, we've seen people being invited along to church who are from very highly secular backgrounds. Families are either agnostic or atheist. And we've also seen people coming along who are perhaps from like a religious background, perhaps a Muslim background, and still being invited along, coming and having an encounter with the risen, living King Jesus and giving their life to him and following him. And where else are you going to have a space where you have someone coming from a completely non-religious, secular background and someone coming from a very religious background, Muslim, coming and worshipping in the same place, having a similar encounter of God's love and being transformed and changed by it. I just think we have an incredible opportunity as a church to respond to the, as you said, the cultural needs of our moment and to the people of our moment in our city. People who are in a new generation as well. And maybe we had, 20 years back, some of the things that we're wrestling with now, in a post-pandemic age even, might look a little bit different to before. So yeah.
And what's really interesting is observing how people are connecting with God. So, usually you have worship, you have a talk, you build to this inspiring moment, and then you do an altar call and people come forward. Whereas actually what's happening is people are just walking into worship and they're just weeping. Like they're just experiencing and encountering the presence of God. And they may not have language for it or be able to articulate what's going on, but there's like something is going on here, and I don't know what it is, but it's they're experiencing the presence of God amongst us. So that's just been incredible. And again, back to what you were saying before, this is not something we can do. It's like we just make space for God to move and for people to come, and we love them and we welcome them, and we try to live a life that reflects the life that Jesus calls us to live. But God does the work, and that is what we've seen. It's not been through our, great ideas or strategic planning, although that's really important. It's just been through God doing things, in some senses, sort of despite our plans, he's just doing stuff. So that's been really cool to watch.
Yeah. I've got goosebumps as we've been talking ever since the Matthew, what was it? 7:13 joy. That's brilliant. It's just really lovely to just see what God is doing and how he's kind of calling us all sort of individually, but also as a whole kind of congregation to a kind of different way of living. And I just think it's really interesting when we talk about like what is this generation looking for? Like we're living in the generation that is constantly on social media, where everything looks so perfect and where there's so much pressure to live this life that looks amazing. Everything's got to look really good. It's all got to be Instagrammable. But really the longings are for something genuine that might not look good and might not like be shiny, but it's genuine. And I think this is also closely related, I think, to the call that we all feel to live life differently and to say, actually, there's a lifestyle here that God is calling us to that doesn't look perhaps like the average London lifestyle. And we know that we're in a city where majority of people are deeply lonely, and yet we're in the most populated city in our nation. And I think God is really putting that on our hearts and saying, what are we doing about this? What are we saying as the church? That we want to be more, we don't want to just be a Sunday experience where you come and then you go. That actually we want you to come and connect, and that we were made for connection, we were made for community, we were made to be in God's community with him, and made to be in community with each other. And, you know, I think this, for me, this is also a personal challenge, because I think I find it difficult opening my home to everybody and, you know, thinking about living more simply. But I really feel that call, especially in this season, to actually kind of think, oh, what am I really doing for the kingdom? You know, how am I really building community and using what God has placed in my hands to build his kingdom? So it feels like we are in a really exciting moment as a church and culturally as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's so many things that you've just stirred in my own mind from that, and that is, you know, over the last few months as a church, I think we've noticed this, especially with our series, our preaching and teaching series recently, that kind of covered aspects of idolatry, and you know, really sensing that people across our services have this yearning for not just simplifying life, but also just being aware of the things that are taking up space that shouldn't be taking up space in the way that it is now. And whether that is with, you know, technology, social media, the way we steward our lives in terms of our money, our bodies, all those things are becoming even more important now than ever, aren't they? Yeah. And I think we're noticing it. And I think there's loads of stats around this, but in terms of the next generation that have, you know, whether it's Gen Z or Gen Alpha now, they have an openness to things that are of, you know, the spiritual openness in life, and they're actually open to being invited along to church as well, which is just incredible. There's a sense of openness about asking, you know, is life going to be okay? Is my future going to be okay? And are there any things that can really provide me a direction to, you know, who I should be, how I should be, that kind of stuff. Which is why I think we have a real opportunity across our services as a church now to really kind of meet people in that space. And I think the reason also our season of Lent has been so powerful for us, for a lot of people in our church, is because, again, this craving of simplicity and that aren't actually bringing us life and fullness. And returning to the things that we feel that God is actually calling us to and wants us to enjoy in his presence, and the way that he wants us to enjoy them, I think is a big thing. And we get to kind of model that and reflect that for those in our friendships and our families who, you know, are just always absorbing and are bombarded by, you know, everything around us, and online and offline. That tells us who we should be, who we shouldn't be, what we should consume or not consume, all that kind of stuff. I think, there's just a lot of opportunity for us, I think.
Yeah. There's a great podcast that Joel sent to me. All the great content I listen to is largely sent from Joel, unless it's John Ortberg. But it was the contrast between David and Saul, and how the people like, give us a king. We want a king like Saul, head and shoulders above everyone else, really impressive. And yet actually where God's hand was this unlikely guy. Even his family thought, oh no, he can't be the future king. He's out in the fields watching sheep, worshipping God. And I think there's maybe something that for us as a church and for our generation right now, the kind of leadership that we're to model is not this kind of head and shoulders really impressive. We know what we're doing. Yeah. I mean, I speak for all of us when I say we don't know what we're doing. We have no idea. But actually, I think God does. And maybe our posture should be, okay, let's just worship Jesus, lean into him, and he'll take us on the great adventure. We don't have the answers, he does. Yeah. And I think that just feels quite fresh. And quite apt for where our culture is at right now. It's more nerve-wracking that way. I think all of us are aware of our own weakness and vulnerability, and not having a plan makes you feel like, oh God, what happens next? I said to Sutton in a prayer meeting just a couple of weeks ago, like, as we run out of space, like, there are no venues I can find at the moment. Like, I feel like Moses at the Red Sea. It's not quite that, because there's no army trying to kill us. But I'm like, where do we go now? I don't know. Okay, Jesus, I've got to lean into you. And in some ways, that's good for us. And you kind of see more exciting stuff happen when you lead that way and live that way, I think.
That's great.
Yeah. Joel, you said something the other day, and it's just really stuck with me. We say, like, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And I think it's that sort of, this is like, we're just like longing for his presence. We're just like leaning into his presence. We just want his presence, and we want that to then produce fruit in our lives, and for that to be evident in how we live our lives, and that simplicity of life and all that kind of stuff. And then you kind of tacked on, something that I guess we say a lot as preachers, and preachers say, I'm working on this too. Yeah, I'm preaching to myself. Yeah, and that has just really stuck with me. And I'm kind of like, there's a kind of, it's kind of like a sort of, come on up. Let's imitate Christ. Yeah. And then we don't need to be preaching to ourselves anymore. We'll be like, no, let's just all just imitate Christ. And follow and really press into his presence. And there are so many things that are vying for our time all of the time, isn't it? So it's really difficult to sort of press into his presence, If only we were a shepherd on a hill with our lyre and just be like, oh, this is fine, there's nothing else to do. Yeah. we'll just worship. But, I don't think I would actually like to be shepherd on a hill, but it's kind of like, how do we really take that time, or how do we sort of dampen the noise and sort of diminish all the noise and all the demands for our attention, and focus in on the presence of God?
For me that kind of came out, I guess, my own journey in terms of preaching and teaching, and that when I call people to something, I want to be like, I live this myself. Like I've been there myself, or I've worked through those battles. And I do think there's a place to, we're not perfect people. Sure. And there is a place to preach things that you are working on yourself. But I think particularly in the moment we're in, where I think people want to hear the life that you're living and the words that you're saying they're connected together. Like, it's not just that this is a great idea, that wouldn't it be cool if we could all do this, but actually it's really hard and I'm not doing it either. Actually, for us as leaders, but I think just anyone following Jesus, it's like, no, this is the life that God has for us. Let's step into it. Let's live it. Let's abstain from the stuff. Let's do all the spiritual practices. Let's put everything first, or whatever. And then when we say, hey, this is the life that's truly life, it's coming from a place that we've been there, we've experienced it, and now we're almost like imparting something. I think people want, it's and this is used a lot, but it's the authenticity and integrity of what we're calling people to. That we're not calling people to something that we're not doing ourselves. And I think that maybe that's just the moment for that. This is just that's a really important value for us. But
I think just to add to what you said there, someone shared with me recently, when we've been inviting our church to fast once a week over Lent, one of the things she mentioned was actually what was really motivating for her to do it is that it was an invite to do what was already being done,
that's good.
Particularly by the leadership.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much, oh, you guys should fast. Like, this is something you ought to do. This is good for you. It's actually, no, join us in fasting. It's imitate me as I imitate Christ, as you said. And I think that is so vital for people to actually have a picture of, okay, what does a life of prayer and fasting and devotional look like, in a city like mine where I live, by people that I'm with, and actually us being able to model that for people makes it just that much easier to invite them to do the same and practice the same. So, yeah.
Just to clarify, Paul said to imitate me as I imitate, as I know you know that. I'm not claiming it was my word.
Is it in the book of Joel?
Yeah. So we are in the middle of this transition, so there's still more to happen. Joy's going to come on staff. We'll be moving over to the central service. You guys will take on the leadership. We'll be commissioning Dave and Philippa to go and do all that God's doing through everything of Forum, whilst staying part of our church and serving as founding pastor and all that stuff. What is on your hearts in terms of prayer? Like, what would you be calling the church to pray for as we continue to move through this transition ahead of this new chapter?
I can go first so that no one else takes my prayer points behind me. I think a lot of the things that we've talked about, there's big themes such as revival, spiritual awakening, God's presence. Those, I think, for me, are like the biggest things that we could seek and desire in our prayer life. Asking for more of God's presence in our own lives, but also in our church life. I think we just don't want to do anything without the presence of God, the presence of the Holy Spirit. And the only way we'll see anything happen and change is through God's presence and his power in our own lives. So I think prayer for that is just going to keep being more and more vital. And prayer also for an awakening to happen in our own lives and the life of our church, to really be stirred, to devote more and more of ourselves to God, to consecrate more and more of our lives to him, and just be more yearning for his presence. I think is probably the biggest prayer point for me.
That's good.
He's stolen mine. That'll be mine too.
So I got in there first.
So I'm like Moses, Exodus 33. What's the point in going on this journey unless we have your presence, God? Sorry, it's just, that's what I long for. That's what brings me alive. When I see others encountering the presence of God, that's what I love. That's what wags my tail. So it'll be that too.
You said this the other day. This is what gets my tail wagging, and it's just a very funny imagery. Thanks for that, Andy. I totally agree. I also feel like wisdom. I would love prayer for wisdom, and I'm really praying for wisdom as we move forward. Wisdom is the principal thing. I think also just wisdom in our own lives as God's calling us to his presence and to a simpler life. Wisdom for what that looks like, and wisdom to say, what do I say yes to? What do I say no to? We say a lot, what is giving me energy and what's not giving me energy. And sometimes it's difficult to really decipher. And so I think just wisdom for all of those things, both on a sort of micro level within our lives, but also on a macro level within the church and the moment that we're in.
It's great. Just amen to all of that. I think probably the other thing that I would add is that what's happened so far through this transition, the sense of peace, the sense of unity, the sense of friendship just continues throughout the whole process as we, the Wades, move, as Joy comes on staff, as you guys take it on, leadership as Dave and Philippa transition out into their new roles, that what we've experienced so far in probably the most significant moment in our church history just carries on. It's been a real gift. So I think that would be my prayer.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth saying, I don't know if this will make the cut or not, but this conversation's been great. And one of the things I think we have talked about that we do want to do in this kind of new chapter is find opportunities to do this more. More so the church can hear more regularly just where we're at, what we're talking about, what's happening in other services, the kind of stories where God is moving, kind of fuel our hearts, but also that we can feel as a community across lots of locations like we're going on this journey together. We probably won't get to this till the autumn at the earliest, but I think I'm really keen that we get a chance to kind of have almost our conversations heard by our church community, so we can kind of help everybody as much as possible feel like we're kind of on the same page, journeying together, and even though we're in lots of different locations, kind of part of this wider family together across London. I think this has been great, and I'm keen that we do it more if we can.
Yeah.
Amen to that.
Amen to that.